Captain Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defender and watched the blue world grow larger through the main screen. Terra Nova looked perfect with its white clouds and green continents. After 3 long years in space, the 50,000 people on his ship were ready to start their new lives on this distant planet. Lisa Rodriguez finished checking the engines one last time. She had been the chief engineer for this entire journey and knew every part of this massive colony ship. The Defender was not built for war or speed, but for carrying families and everything they needed to build a new world. It held farms and factories, schools and hospitals, all packed into one giant vessel that would become humanity's first home beyond their own solar system. Dr. Alex Carter pressed his face against a window in the science section. He could hardly wait to study the plants and animals on Terra Nova. His wife Maria was just as excited about starting the farms that would feed their new colony. They had left Earth with such hope and dreams of what they could build together. On this new world the communication system suddenly made a loud noise that made everyone jump. Kate Johnson quickly moved to her station and began working with the radio equipment. Her face went white as she looked at the readings on her screen. "Captain Harrison," she said in a shaking voice, "there are ships coming out of hyperspace. Lots of them." Jake Harrison felt his stomach drop. They had not expected to meet anyone else out here. Earth's long-range scans had shown Terra Nova was empty of intelligent life. He looked at the screen. As dozens of dark ships appeared, like angry clouds around their peaceful colony vessel, the alien ships were unlike anything humans had ever seen. They looked like giant insects made of metal with long spikes and sharp edges. The ships moved in ways that seemed wrong, twisting and turning like living creatures instead of machines. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Peters ran onto the bridge. He had been training the colonists for emergency procedures, but nothing had prepared them for this. "Sir, the colonists are asking what's happening. Should I tell them to go to the safe areas?" Jake Harrison opened the communication channel to try to talk to the alien ships. "This is Captain Jake Harrison of the human vessel USS Defender. We come in peace. We are simple colonists looking for a new home. Please respond." The answer came not in words, but in weapons fire. Bright red beams shot out from the alien ships and hit the Defender's shields. The whole ship shook and the lights went out for a moment before coming back on. "Shields down to 60%, Lisa Rodriguez shouted over the noise of alarms. "These weapons are stronger than anything we've seen before." Jake Harrison tried again to communicate. "Please stop firing. We have families on board, children and old people. We don't want to fight. We can leave if this planet belongs to you." The alien ships did not answer with words. Instead, more of them appeared from hyperspace. Soon there were over 100 enemy vessels surrounding the single human colony ship. The aliens began to attack from all sides. The Defender's few defensive weapons were no match for so many attackers. The ship had been built to carry people and supplies, not to fight wars. Within minutes, the shields failed completely and the alien weapons began tearing holes in the ship's hull. "All hands abandon ship," Jake Harrison ordered, though his heart was breaking. "Get to the escape pods. Protect the children first." Ryan Peters and his security team tried to keep order as thousands of panicked colonists ran toward the escape pods. Families held their children tight as they climbed into the small ships that were supposed to save their lives. But the aliens were not interested in letting anyone escape. As soon as the escape pods launched from the dying Defender, the alien ships hunted them down one by one. The pods had no weapons and no shields. They were helpless against the alien attackers. Kate Johnson managed to keep one communication system working long enough to record what was happening. The images she captured would later shock the people of Earth. The aliens were not just killing the humans. They were collecting the bodies for some horrible purpose. Alex Carter and Maria Carter made it to an escape pod with their young daughter. They held each other tight as their pod tried to reach Terra Nova's surface. Behind them, they could see the USS Defender breaking apart as more alien weapons hit it. Most of the escape pods never made it to the planet. The alien ships destroyed them in space or hunted them down after they landed. Of the 50,000 humans who had left Earth with such hope, only a few dozen survived long enough to hide in Terra Nova's forests. Ryan Peters found Kate Johnson and a handful of other survivors near a crashed pod. Together they managed to repair a small scout ship that had been stored in one of the pods. As they prepared to escape, they watched in horror as the aliens landed on Terra Nova and began hunting down the remaining humans. The aliens were as terrible to look at as their ships. They stood on 6 legs like giant insects and had sharp claws and teeth. But the worst part was how they treated the human bodies they found. The survivors watched in sick fear as the aliens fed on their dead friends and family members. Kate Johnson made sure her recording equipment captured everything. Someone had to survive to tell Earth what had happened here. Someone had to show the world that humanity was not alone in the universe, and that the neighbors they had found were monsters. The small scout ship barely made it away from Terra Nova. As they jumped into hyperspace, the survivors took one last look at the planet that was supposed to be their new home. Instead of hope and new beginnings, they were bringing back news of humanity's first encounter with an alien race that saw them as nothing more than food. Ambassador Helen Torres returned to Earth with news that broke the hearts of every human being who heard it. The great alien civilizations of the galaxy had laughed at human suffering and called the Terra Nova massacre nothing more than pest control. The 50,000 dead colonists were worth less than a single alien warship in the eyes of Galactic Justice. President Nathan Brooks called an emergency meeting of world leaders. The usually calm man looked older than his 60 years as he read the reports from the Galactic Council. His advisors sat around the table in stunned silence as they learned that humanity had no friends among the stars. They see us as animals, Helen Torres told the assembled leaders. Clever animals, but animals all the same. In their minds, what the Zephyrians did was no different from a farmer clearing rats out of his barn. The anger in the room was like a living thing. These were people who had spent their whole lives believing that intelligence and civilization meant something. They had thought that once humanity reached the stars, they would find kindred spirits among the alien races. Instead, they had found predators who viewed them as prey. President Brooks made a decision that would change human history forever. Effective immediately, Earth will implement the Silence Protocol. All diplomatic contact with alien civilizations is hereby terminated. We are withdrawing from all galactic organizations and treaties. Humanity will have nothing more to do with these creatures. To the rest of the galaxy, it looked like humanity was giving up. Earth's embassies closed overnight. Human ships stopped traveling beyond the solar system. All communication with alien governments ended without explanation. The galaxy assumed that the young human species had learned their place and accepted their fate as a minor power destined to remain trapped on their homeworld. But behind closed doors, something very different was happening. President Brooks had called General Patricia Holmes into his office for a private meeting. The tough military woman had spent her career preparing for wars that might never come. Now she was being asked to prepare for the most important war in human history. Patricia, I'm giving you unlimited resources and complete authority over a new project, the president said. I want you to build something that will make the aliens regret the day they decided to laugh at human pain. General Holmes understood immediately. What do you want me to call this project, sir? Call it Project Prometheus, after the Greek god who stole fire from the heavens and gave it to mortals. Dr. Kevin Walsh was one of the first scientists recruited for the secret project. He had been working on theoretical weapons designs that most people thought were impossible to build. Now he was being given all the funding and resources he needed to turn his wildest ideas into reality. Commander Rachel Stone joined the project as head of strategic planning. She was known throughout the military as someone who could look at any problem and find a way to solve it. Her job was to figure out how a single species trapped in one solar system could destroy enemies who controlled hundreds of star systems. Captain Tony Miller brought his expertise in space tactics to the project. He had studied every piece of information humanity had about alien military capabilities. His analysis was grim but not hopeless. The aliens were powerful, but they were also overconfident. They would never expect an attack from a species they considered harmless. Deep underground facilities were built in secret locations around Earth and its colonies. Thousands of the brightest human minds worked day and night on technologies that had never been attempted before. They studied the wreckage of the USS Defender and learned how alien technology worked. More importantly, they learned how to destroy it. The work was dangerous and exhausting. Many experiments failed, and some scientists died in accidents involving forces that humans had never dealt with before. But every failure taught them something new, and every small success brought them closer to their goal. Meanwhile, the galaxy continued to treat humanity with contempt. Zephyrian raids on human shipping increased since the aliens knew that Earth would not complain to the Galactic Council anymore. Other species began to view human territory as free for the taking. Since humans had apparently given up any claim to respect or protection, alien merchants who had once traded with humans now refused to do business with them. Alien tourists stopped visiting Earth, saying it was boring to watch a species that had no ambition to explore the galaxy. The few humans who still lived on alien worlds were treated as second-class citizens or worse, but humanity's silence was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a predator learning to hunt. Every insult from the aliens, every attack on human ships, every laugh at human expense was carefully recorded and remembered. The list of grievances grew longer every day, and so did humanity's determination to make the galaxy pay for its cruelty. Kevin Walsh made the first major breakthrough when he successfully created a weapon that could destroy matter at the atomic level. The test was conducted on a small asteroid in the outer solar system. When the weapon fired, the asteroid simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no debris, just empty space where a mountain of rock and metal had been moments before. Commander Rachel Stone used this success to develop a plan that was breathtaking in its scope and ruthlessness. If the aliens wanted to treat humans like animals, then humans would show them what animals could do when they were backed into a corner and had nothing left to lose. The plan called for simultaneous attacks on every Zephyrian world and military installation. There would be no warnings, no demands for surrender, no mercy shown to civilians. The entire Zephyrian Empire would be wiped out in a single coordinated strike that would happen so fast the aliens would have no time to respond or call for help. Captain Tony Miller worked out the tactical details of moving human fleets across the galaxy without being detected. New ships were built using technology that made them invisible to alien sensors. These ghost fleets would position themselves near Zephyrian worlds and wait for the signal to attack. The most difficult part was keeping the project secret. Thousands of people were involved in building the weapons and ships needed for Operation Starfall, as the attack plan came to be known. But every person involved understood that the future of humanity depended on the aliens never learning what was being prepared for them. 3 years passed while humanity worked in secret. To the galaxy, Earth seemed to have faded into insignificance. The aliens rarely thought about humans anymore, except to make jokes about the primitive species that had dared to seek justice and been put in their place. but in hidden facilities across human space, the final preparations for Operation Starfall were being completed. The weapons that would erase the Zephyrian Empire from existence were loaded onto ships that could cross the galaxy unseen. The human officers who would command these ghost fleets knew that they were about to change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. General Patricia Holmes stood in the main command center and looked at the displays showing human fleet positions throughout Zephyrian space. After 3 years of planning and preparation, humanity was finally ready to show the galaxy what happened to those who mistook human silence for weakness. The aliens had taught humanity that in this galaxy, might made right and the strong preyed upon the weak. Soon, the galaxy would learn that they had made the mistake of underestimating just how strong humans could become, when they had a good reason to be angry. Admiral Frank Cooper received the coded message he had been waiting 3 years to see. 2 simple words appeared on his secure communication screen: Starfall commence. He looked around the bridge of his flagship, the UEE's Vengeance, and saw the faces of men and women who had trained for this moment since the day they learned about Terra Nova. The human fleet that surrounded Cooper's ship was unlike anything that had ever existed in the galaxy. These were not the clumsy colony ships that had carried hopeful families to new worlds. These were weapons of war, built with one purpose in mind: the complete destruction of the Zephyrian Empire. Captain Linda Brooks commanded the UES Retribution, one of the deadliest ships in the Ghost Fleet. Her weapons officer, Carlos Rivera, ran final checks on the planet-killer weapons that Dr. Kevin Walsh had designed. The tactical specialist Amy Foster coordinated with other ships in the fleet to make sure every target would be hit at exactly the same moment. The human ships were invisible to alien sensors, thanks to technology that bent light and energy around them like water flowing around a stone. They had been moving into position around Zephyrian worlds for months, but the aliens had no idea that death was waiting in the darkness around their planets. Keth Prime was the first target. This Zephyrian colony world was home to 30 million aliens who lived in vast hive cities that stretched deep underground. The planet's surface was covered with the kind of industrial facilities that could build the warships used to hunt down human escape pods at Terra Nova. Admiral Cooper gave the order that would begin humanity's revenge. All ships you are authorized to fire. Show them the same mercy they showed our people. The UE's Vengeance fired first. A beam of pure energy that could unmake matter itself lanced down from orbit and struck the largest city on Keth Prime. The beam was invisible until it hit the atmosphere. Then it became a pillar of white fire that could be seen from Space Dot where the city had stood. There was now a perfectly round crater that went down to the planet's molten core. 30 million Zephyrians lived in that city, and now they were simply gone. Not dead, not destroyed, but erased from existence as if they had never been born. The other human ships fired their weapons at the same time. Military bases, industrial centers, and population hubs disappeared one after another. The Zephyrians on Keth Prime had no time to send distress calls or evacuation orders. In less than 10 minutes, the entire planet was dead. Captain Steve Anderson commanded a reconnaissance ship that had been watching Zephyrian military movements for months. His job was to make sure no enemy forces escaped the attack. He watched through his ship's sensors as the last Zephyrian base on Keth Prime was erased by human weapons. Target eliminated, Anderson reported to Admiral Cooper. No survivors detected. No escape ships launched. Keth Prime is completely dead. Similar reports came in from attack fleets throughout Zephyrian space. Lieutenant Colonel Dana Wright coordinated strikes on 3 different worlds, each one home to millions of aliens who had celebrated the Terra Nova massacre. Captain Greg Turner led the assault on a major military shipyard where new Zephyrian warships were built. The attacks happened so quickly that most Zephyrians died without ever knowing they were under attack. Human ships would appear from nowhere, fire their terrible weapons, and disappear again before anyone could respond. Entire worlds went silent in minutes, their populations erased as completely as if they had never existed. The few Zephyrian ships that were in space when the attacks began tried to fight back, but they were no match for human technology. The aliens had spent centuries building weapons designed to hunt down helpless colony ships and defenseless escape pods. They had never prepared to fight an enemy that was stronger than they were. Captain Lisa Davis commanded a human destroyer that intercepted a Zephyrian patrol fleet trying to investigate what had happened to one of their colonies. The alien ships fired everything they had at the human vessel, but their weapons could not even scratch its shields. "Return fire," Davis ordered calmly. Her ship's main gun fired once, and 3 Zephyrian warships simply vanished. The remaining aliens tried to flee, but human ships were faster than anything the Zephyrians had ever built. The galaxy began to notice that something strange was happening in Zephyrian space. Colonies stopped responding to communication attempts. Trade ships disappeared without sending distress calls. Military patrols failed to report in at their scheduled times. At first, other alien species assumed the Zephyrians were dealing with some kind of internal rebellion or natural disaster. The proud insect-like aliens were too arrogant to ask for help, so their neighbors simply waited for normal communications to resume. But as days passed and the silence from Zephyrian space continued, some aliens began to worry. The Zephyrians controlled hundreds of star systems and had one of the most powerful militaries in the galaxy. It seemed impossible that an entire empire could just disappear. Captain Robert Blake led a deep reconnaissance mission to gather intelligence on remaining Zephyrian forces. His job was to make sure no major military units had escaped the initial attacks. What he found was an empire in its death throes. The few Zephyrian ships that had survived the first wave of attacks were running scared, trying to reach safe harbors that no longer existed. Every time they tried to land on a friendly world, they found nothing but empty craters where cities used to be. Major Susan Parker coordinated the destruction of the Zephyrian capital system. This was where War Prime Clef9 had his headquarters, surrounded by the most powerful defenses the aliens could build. It made no difference. Human weapons cut through Zephyrian shields like they were made of paper. The aliens who had once fed on human bodies now learned what it felt like to face a predator that was stronger than they were. But unlike the humans at Terra Nova, the Zephyrians were not given any chance to surrender or escape. This was not war. It was extermination. Some alien species began to suspect that the Zephyrians were under attack by an unknown enemy. Long-range sensors detected massive energy discharges in Zephyrian space, but no one could identify what was causing them. The weapons being used were unlike anything in known galactic databases. A few alien investigators tried to send ships into Zephyrian territory to find out what was happening. These ships never returned. They were intercepted by human patrol vessels and destroyed before they could report what they had seen. Captain Paul Johnson commanded one of these patrol ships. His orders were simple: no witnesses. Any alien ship that tried to enter former Zephyrian space was to be eliminated immediately. The galaxy must not learn that humans were responsible for the destruction until it was too late to stop them. Systematic elimination of the Zephyrian Empire took 3 weeks to complete. Every world they had controlled, every ship they had built, every military base they had established was methodically destroyed by human forces that appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. Admiral Cooper stood on his bridge and looked at the tactical display showing the final phase of Operation Starfall. Red markers that had once indicated Zephyrian worlds and fleets were disappearing one by one as human weapons did their work. Soon, there would be nothing left of the Empire that had murdered 50,000 human colonists. The Ghost Fleet had lived up to its name. They had moved through Zephyrian space like spirits of vengeance, bringing death to those who had thought themselves untouchable. The aliens who had once hunted human children for sport now knew what it felt like to be the prey, but this was only the beginning of humanity's revenge. The Zephyrians had been the ones who pulled the trigger at Terra Nova, but the entire Galactic Council had laughed at human suffering and declared that human lives were worthless. Soon, the galaxy would learn that humanity had a very long memory, and an even longer reach. The time for hiding in the shadows was almost over. Soon, it would be time for the galaxy to see what humanity had become during their 3 years of silence. War Prime Clef 9 stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Devourer of Worlds, as it dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol System. Behind him followed the most powerful battle fleet the Zephyrian Empire had ever assembled. 300 warships, each one capable of destroying a planet, had come to finish what they started at Terra Nova. The War Prime's compound eyes gleamed with anticipation as he looked at the small yellow star ahead of them. Somewhere in this system was the pathetic world that spawned the creatures who dared to seek justice for their dead. Today, Earth would burn, and every human being would learn what happened to species that forgot their place in the galaxy. Begin the attack, Clef 9 ordered his officers. Show these vermin the same mercy we showed their colonists. But as the Zephyrian fleet moved deeper into the Sol System, something felt wrong to the War Prime. His sensors showed no signs of the desperate defensive preparations he had expected. There were no panicked radio broadcasts, no evacuation ships fleeing the inner planets, no military forces rushing to defend their homeworld. Admiral Betty Clark sat in the command center buried deep beneath Earth's surface and watched the alien fleet approach on her tactical displays. The same woman who had once served refreshments to alien diplomats now controlled weapons that could shatter moons. She had been waiting 3 years for this moment. All defense platforms are ready, reported General Chris Murphy from his position at the orbital command station. Fleet units are in position and awaiting orders. The aliens have walked right into our trap. The Sol System had been transformed during humanity's 3 years of silence. What looked like empty space to Zephyrian sensors was actually filled with cloaked defense platforms, hidden weapon satellites, and ghost ships waiting for the order to attack. Earth itself had become a fortress. The blue world that had once seemed so peaceful and defenseless was now protected by shields that could stop planet-killing weapons and surrounded by automated defense systems that could track and destroy thousands of targets at once. War Prime Clef 9 began to feel the first stirrings of doubt as his fleet approached the inner system. His most advanced sensors still showed no signs of human military activity, but something was making his warrior instincts scream warnings at him. War Prime, his tactical officer reported. We are detecting some unusual energy readings throughout the system. Our computers cannot identify the source. Ignore it, Clef 9 snarled. These humans have no technology we need to fear. Continue the attack. Admiral Clark decided it was time to spring the trap. All units, decloak and engage. Show them what humanity has learned. Suddenly, the empty space around the Zephyrian fleet came alive with human warships. The Ghost Fleet that had been systematically destroying Zephyrian colonies for weeks materialized out of nowhere, their weapons already charged and ready to fire. War Prime Clef 9 stared in shock as hundreds of human ships appeared around his fleet. These were not the crude colony vessels he remembered from Terra Nova. These were sleek predators built for one purpose: killing aliens who thought themselves superior to humanity. Impossible, the War Prime whispered. The humans have no technology. Like this, our intelligence reports showed they were a primitive species barely capable of interstellar travel. His tactical officer's voice was filled with fear. War Prime, these human ships are more advanced than anything in our databases. Their energy signatures are off the charts. The first human salvo tore through the Zephyrian formation like a hot knife through butter. Weapons that could unmake. Matter at the atomic level reached out from the human ships and touched the alien vessels. Where the beams hit, Zephyrian warships simply ceased to exist. Captain Linda Brooks aimed the UES Retribution at the War Prime's flagship and fired her main gun. The beam missed the bridge by meters, instead vaporizing the ship's primary weapon. Array and leaving Cleth-9 helpless to fight back. Admiral Frank Cooper's voice came over the communication channels, speaking in perfect Zephyrian. War Prime Cleth-9, this is Admiral Frank Cooper of the Human Defense Fleet. You are hereby under arrest for the crime of genocide against 50,000 innocent people. War Prime Cleth-9 tried to respond, but his communication array had been destroyed along with most of his ship's systems. Around him, the pride of the Zephyrian Empire was being systematically dismantled by human weapons that made their own technology look like stone axes, but the battle in the Sol system was only part of humanity's revelation. At the exact same moment, human fleets were attacking every remaining Zephyrian stronghold throughout the galaxy. The aliens who had thought their empire was invincible watched in horror as their homeworld burned under human guns. Captain Greg Turner led the assault on the Zephyrian capital city, a massive hive complex that housed billions of aliens. His orders were clear: complete extermination. The beings who had fed on human flesh at Terra Nova would not be given the chance to surrender or beg for mercy. The planet killer weapons fired simultaneously from orbit, and the Zephyrian homeworld began to die. Cities that had stood for thousands of years vanished in pillars of white fire. The aliens who had once celebrated the Terra Nova massacre now experienced the same terror and hopelessness their human victims had felt. Major Susan Parker coordinated the destruction of the Zephyrian government complex where War Prime Cleth-9 had once planned the extermination of humanity. The building that had housed the Empire's leadership became a crater that glowed with residual energy from human weapons. Throughout the galaxy, other alien species watched in amazement as the Zephyrian Empire simply ceased to exist. Long-range sensors detected massive explosions throughout their territory, but no one understood what was happening until it was too late to matter. Back in the Sol system, War Prime Cleth-9 found himself pulled aboard a human ship as his flagship broke apart around him. The proud alien warrior who had once dismissed humans as vermin now stood in chains before Admiral Betty Clark. "You killed 50,000 of our people," Admiral Clark said, her voice cold as space itself. "Men, women, and children who had done nothing to harm you. You fed on their bodies like the animal you are." Cleth-9 tried to maintain his arrogant facade. "We are the superior species. It is our right to claim territory and resources from lesser beings. Your people were nothing but clever animals." "Were we?" Admiral Clark asked. She gestured to the tactical display showing the complete destruction of the Zephyrian Empire. "Your entire civilization has been erased in a single day. Every world you controlled, every ship you built, every warrior you trained is gone. We did in hours what you thought would take you years to do to us." The War Prime stared at the display in disbelief. The red markers that had once represented hundreds of Zephyrian worlds and fleets were gone. In their place were empty sectors of space where nothing remained but cosmic dust and fading energy signatures. "This is impossible," Cleth-9 said, his voice breaking. "We are an ancient empire. We have conquered dozens of species. We cannot be defeated by primitive humans." "You made two mistakes," Admiral Clark told him. First, you assumed that being primitive meant we were weak. Second, you assumed that being weak meant we would stay that way. Humans learned from their enemies, and we learned everything we needed to know from studying your technology. Captain Carlos Rivera brought news from the other human fleets. Admiral, all Zephyrian positions have been eliminated. Total enemy casualties are estimated at 47 billion. Human losses are 0. Admiral Clark nodded grimly. The mathematics of revenge had been calculated with perfect precision. The Zephyrians had killed 50,000 humans at Terra Nova. In response, humanity had eliminated their entire species. It was not an equal exchange, but it was a clear message to the galaxy about what happened to those who underestimated human determination. The few alien observers who witnessed the destruction of the Zephyrian Empire could barely believe what they had seen. A species that the entire galaxy had dismissed as harmless had just demonstrated military capabilities that surpassed anything known to galactic civilization. War Prime. Clef 9 looked around the human ship that held him prisoner and finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. The creatures he had dismissed as clever animals had become the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. They had spent 3 years in silence, learning and growing and preparing for this moment. "What are you going to do with me?" the War Prime asked. Admiral Clark smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You are going to help us deliver a message to the Galactic Council. They need to understand that humanity is no longer the helpless species they remember from Terra Nova. We have become something very different, and it's time the galaxy learned what that means." President Michelle Lee stood on the bridge of the UES Sovereign, a massive dreadnought that cast its shadow over the Galactic Council station like a dark moon. The same alien delegates who had once laughed at human suffering now waited in terrified silence for her to speak. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted overnight, and everyone knew it. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council looked very different from the last time Ambassador Helen Torres had stood in it, where once the alien delegates had sat in comfortable arrogance. Now they huddled in their seats like frightened children. The screens around the hall showed images of dead Zephyrian worlds, their surfaces scarred with the perfectly round craters left by human weapons. Dr. Alan White, now serving as humanity's chief xenobiologist, stepped forward to address the assembly. His role had changed dramatically since Terra Nova. Instead of studying alien life forms, he now studied alien weaknesses and reported on which species would be most vulnerable to human retaliation. "Honored delegates," Dr. White began, his voice echoing through the silent hall. 6 months ago, you sat in these same seats and declared that the murder of 50,000 human beings was worth a fine of 50,000 energy credits. You laughed at our pain and called us clever animals who did not deserve justice. The alien delegates shifted nervously in their seats. Many of them remembered making jokes about human emotional responses after the Terra Nova hearings. Those jokes seemed much less funny now that humanity had demonstrated what their emotions could accomplish when properly focused. President Lee took control of the presentation. The Zephyrian Empire no longer exists. Every world they controlled has been sterilized. Every ship they built has been destroyed. Every member of their species has been eliminated. This was accomplished in less than 24 hours by the same primitive humans you dismissed as unworthy of protection. A delegate that looked like a walking crystal formation raised one of its appendages. "President Lee, surely you cannot expect us to believe that humanity single-handedly destroyed an entire galactic empire. The Zephyrians controlled hundreds of star systems and had one of the most advanced militaries in known space." In response, President Lee activated a holographic display that showed the orbital bombardment of the Zephyrian homeworld. The aliens watched in horrified fascination as human planet-killer weapons reduced a world of 40 billion inhabitants to molten slag in less than an hour. The evidence speaks for itself, President Lee said calmly. Humanity spent 3 years in silence, learning from our enemies and preparing for this day. You taught us that in this galaxy, might makes right and the strong prey upon the weak. We have learned that lesson very well. Ambassador Helen Torres, now serving as humanity's chief diplomatic officer, presented the galaxy with humanity's new terms for coexistence. The document was simple and direct, written in language even the most arrogant alien could understand. Every species that participated in or endorsed the Terra Nova verdict will pay reparations to humanity, Torres announced. The amount will be determined by your level of involvement in denying us justice. Those who voted to approve the Zephyrian actions will pay more than those who merely remained silent. A tall, thin alien with blue skin that had once served as the council leader tried to object. This is extortion. The Galactic Council cannot be held responsible for the actions of individual member species, can it? President Lee asked. She gestured to Admiral Roy Evans, who commanded the human fleet surrounding the station. Admiral Evans, please demonstrate our commitment to the new galactic order. Evans nodded and gave an order to his gunners. A single shot from the UES Sovereign struck an uninhabited moon near the station. The moon, which had been visible through the hall's great windows for thousands of years, simply vanished in a flash of light. The alien delegates stared in shock at the empty space where the moon had been. The message was clear. Humanity now possessed the power to erase any target they chose, and they were not afraid to use it. General Nancy Phillips presented the military aspects of humanity's new order. Human monitoring stations would be established throughout the galaxy, staffed by officers trained to watch for any signs of anti-human activity. These stations would be defended by fleets capable of sterilizing entire star systems if threatened. Any species found to be planning aggressive action against humanity will be eliminated, General Phillips explained. Any species found to be supporting such action will face the same fate. Any species found to be harboring fugitives from human justice will be considered an enemy of humanity. The delegates began to understand that they were not negotiating with the same desperate humans who had pleaded for justice after Terra Nova. These humans had been transformed by betrayal and powered by a desire for revenge that had consumed an entire galactic empire. Dr. White continued with the scientific aspects of humanity's ultimatum. We have studied the biology and psychology of every species represented in this chamber. We know your weaknesses, your fears, and exactly how to eliminate you if the need arises. This information has been distributed to human commanders throughout the galaxy. A delegate that resembled a giant insect, similar to the extinct Zephyrians, made the mistake of trying to sound threatening. Humanity may have surprised the Zephyrians, but you are still vastly outnumbered by the combined forces of the galaxy. We will not submit to the demands of a single species. President Lee smiled, but her expression was as cold as the space between stars. Are you volunteering your species to be the next example? I assure you, the demonstration would be just as thorough as what we did to the Zephyrians. The insect-like alien immediately backed down, its earlier bravado forgotten. Around the hall, other delegates who had been considering resistance thought better of it. The empty space where the moon had been served as a constant reminder of what human weapons could accomplish. Captain Pete Johnson, grandson of Terra Nova survivor Kate Johnson, brought news from the Outer Rim territories. Human patrol fleets were already enforcing the new order, and alien merchant ships were learning to avoid human space unless they had specific permission to enter. Sir, we've had 17 alien vessels alter course to avoid our patrol areas. In the last hour, Johnson reported. Word is spreading quickly that humanity is no longer to be trifled with. President Lee addressed the alien delegates one final time. The age of alien supremacy is over. For too long, younger species have been treated as expendable by civilizations that consider themselves superior. That ends today. She paused to let her words sink in before continuing. Humanity will now serve as the protector of those species that cannot protect themselves. Any civilization that preys upon the weak will answer to us. Any empire that commits genocide will face the same fate as the Zephyrians. The transformation was complete. The same species that had once begged for justice now stood as judge, jury, and executioner for the entire galaxy. The aliens who had dismissed humans as clever animals now lived in fear of their former victims. Ambassador Torres looked around the great hall and remembered how different it had been during her last visit. Then, she had been a desperate woman pleading for justice for her murdered people. Now she represented the most feared military power in galactic history. The alien delegates filed out of the hall in silence, their heads bowed in submission. Many of them had ruled star-spanning empires for thousands of years, but they had never faced an enemy like humanity. The humans had proven that underestimating them was a fatal mistake. As the U.S. Sovereign prepared to leave the council station, President Lee took one last look at the assembled alien representatives. They were already beginning to argue among themselves about how to pay the reparations humanity demanded and how to avoid becoming the next species to be eliminated. "Madam President," Admiral Evans asked, "do you think they've learned their lesson?" President Lee considered the question carefully. "Some of them have. The others will learn eventually, or they will join the Zephyrians in extinction. Either way, the galaxy will never again mistake human kindness for weakness." Captain Johnson's patrol ship, the U.S. Vengeance, took its position on the outer rim of known space. As he watched alien merchant vessels frantically change course to avoid human territory, he reflected on how much had changed since Terra Nova. The stars themselves seemed different now. Where once they had looked down on a young species struggling to find its place in an hostile galaxy, now they illuminated human warships that enforced a new order based on the simple principle that might makes right. The galaxy had taught humanity that lesson at Terra Nova, and humanity had learned it well. Perhaps too well. The question now was whether the former victims could resist becoming the very monsters they had once fought against, but for now, that was a concern for future generations. The survivors of Terra Nova had kept their promise. To the dead, justice had been served, even if it came at the cost of 47 billion alien lives. The galaxy would remember the price of underestimating humanity, and hopefully, no other species would ever again face the choice between submission and extinction. The age of human dominance had begun, and the stars themselves bore witness to the transformation of a peaceful species into the galaxy's most feared predator. Ambassador Helen Torres walked into the Great Hall of the Galactic Council with her head held high, even though her hands were shaking. 6 months had passed since the Terra Nova massacre, and now humanity would finally get justice. The huge room was filled with representatives from dozens of alien species, all sitting in their special chairs designed for their different body types. The video recordings that Kate Johnson had risked her life to make were ready to be shown. Dr. Sam Mitchell had spent weeks studying every detail of the evidence. The proof was clear and terrible. The Zephyrian Empire had committed genocide against innocent human colonists. Helen Torres looked around the room at the alien faces watching her. Some looked almost human, others were so strange she could barely understand how they moved or breathed. But they were all supposed to be civilized beings who believed in justice and law. Surely they would see that what happened at Terra Nova was wrong. The council leader, a tall, thin creature with blue skin, called for order. The human delegation may present their case against the Zephyrian Empire. It said in a voice that sounded like wind through metal. Helen Torres stepped forward and began to speak. Honored members of the Galactic Council, 6 months ago, 50,000 human beings were murdered in cold blood. They were simple colonists, families with children, old people, and young couples hoping to start new lives. They carried no weapons of war. They threatened no one. She nodded to Dr. Sam Mitchell, who began showing the recordings on the great screens around the hall. The images were hard to watch. The USS Defender breaking apart under alien weapons fire. Escape pods being hunted down like animals. Human bodies being collected by creatures that looked like giant insects. These are the Zephyrians, Helen Torres continued, pointing at the alien attackers in the videos. They gave no warning. They accepted no surrender. They showed no mercy to our children or our elderly. This was not war. This was extermination. Many of the alien delegates shifted in their seats as they watched the horrible scenes. Some looked upset by what they were seeing. Others seemed bored, as if watching recordings of mass murder was just another day at the office. Dr. Sam Mitchell presented his scientific analysis. The weapons used were designed to cause maximum pain and suffering. The Zephyrians could have killed the humans quickly, but they chose not to. The evidence shows they wanted the humans to suffer before they died. The most horrible part came next. The recording showed what the Zephyrians did after the killing was done. They did not bury the human dead or show any respect for them. Instead, they fed on the bodies like wild animals. This is not the behavior of a civilized species, Helen Torres said, her voice growing stronger with anger. This is the behavior of monsters. The Galactic Council exists to prevent exactly this kind of horror. We demand justice for our dead. When the human presentation was finished, it was time for the Zephyrians to defend themselves. War Prime Clef 9 rose from his seat. He was even more frightening in person than in the recordings. His 6 legs moved with deadly grace, and his black eyes showed no emotion at all. The humans speak of justice, Clef 9 said in a voice like breaking glass. But justice for whom? We found vermin infesting a world we had marked for expansion. We did what any intelligent species would do. We removed the pests. Helen Torres could not believe what she was hearing. Pests? We are talking about 50,000 human beings. Men, women, and children with hopes and dreams and families who love them. Clef 9 made a sound that might have been laughter. The humans flatter themselves. They are barely more intelligent than the animals they keep as pets. They have no real technology, no understanding of the greater universe. They are insects complaining about being stepped on by giants. The War Prime turned to address the other alien delegates. Look at them. They live short lives on one small world. They fight among themselves over scraps of resources. They know nothing of the complexities of galactic politics or the realities of expansion. How can such creatures be considered equals to beings like ourselves who have built empires spanning hundreds of star systems? Helen Torres felt sick as she watched the other alien delegates nodding along with the Zephyrians' words. She had expected them to be horrified by the massacre, but instead they seemed to agree that humans were somehow less deserving of life. The council leader called for testimony from other species. One by one, alien representatives stood up to speak. Most of them said the same thing in different ways. Humans were young and primitive. The galaxy was dangerous. What happened at Terra Nova was unfortunate, but not really anyone's fault. A delegate that looked like a walking tree said, "Perhaps the humans should have been more careful about where they chose to settle. The galaxy has many dangers for unprepared species." Another alien that seemed to be made of living crystal added, "The Zephyrians are known for being territorial. The humans should have asked permission before entering their space." Helen Torres wanted to scream. "We did not know that space belonged to anyone. Our long-range scans showed no signs of intelligent life on Terra Nova or anywhere nearby. How? Could we ask permission from people we did not know existed? But her protests fell on deaf ears. The alien delegates had already made up their minds. They saw humans as newcomers who did not understand the rules of galactic civilization. What happened to them was sad, but it was also their own fault for being weak and ignorant. When the time came for the council to vote, Helen Torres still hoped that justice would prevail. Surely these beings could not watch recordings of genocide and do nothing about it. The council leader announced the verdict. The Zephyrian Empire is found to have acted with excessive enthusiasm in their territorial expansion. They are hereby fined 50,000 energy credits and advised to show more restraint in future encounters with primitive species. Helen Torres stared in shock. 50,000 energy credits was nothing to an empire that controlled dozens of star systems. It was less than the cost of a single Zephyrian warship. The council was putting a price on human lives, and that price was almost nothing. What about our dead? She asked, her voice breaking. What about justice for the 50,000 people who were murdered? The council leader looked at her with what might have been pity. Young species often confuse justice with revenge. The Zephyrians have been appropriately disciplined. This matter is now closed. As the alien delegates began filing out of the hall, many of them were actually laughing about the human presentation. Helen Torres heard one of them say, "Did you see how upset they got over a few dead animals? These humans are far too emotional to be taken seriously." Helen Torres stood alone in the great hall. Surrounded by the empty seats were beings who called themselves civilized, had just decided that human lives were worth almost nothing. The recordings of Terra Nova were still playing on the screens, but no one was watching anymore. She realized that humanity was truly alone in the universe. They lived in a galaxy full of creatures who saw them as nothing more than clever pets. If humans wanted justice, they would have to make it themselves.